That night, when the rain came, Vera Gu pushed open the heavy doors of the family mansion, her soaked lab coat still dripping onto the marble floor. Her mother had called, frantic, saying her father was dying. But inside, her father was calmly sipping tea, her mother was laughing with her younger sister, and her husband was sitting there in his expensive suit with a divorce agreement laid out on his knee. Beneath the bold title, Divorce Agreement, ran a smaller line, Patent Rights Transfer Waiver. Her sister looped her arm through her husband's and smiled, "He's marrying me, sis. Just sign it and get out." Vera looked at the four people around that rosewood table, father, mother, sister, husband, and realized she'd just walked into a play that had been rehearsing for years, and she was the only audience member they'd ever needed. She picked up the pen and signed her name on every page, neat and steady, the way she filled out her lab notebooks. Then she stripped off her wet coat, threw it in her sister's face, and walked out into the storm. No one saw her get into her car. No one heard her dial the number she hadn't called in 3 years. And no one heard her say, in a voice she barely recognized as her own, "Activate the Qingnang Trust." Plan 1. From that moment on, Vera Gu was no one's daughter, no one's sister, no one's wife. She was only one thing now, the reckoning. The July rain in Seaport City came without warning, fierce and fast. One moment the sky was merely overcast, the next, it was as if someone had ripped open the heavens. Rain poured down in sheets, striking the asphalt and throwing up clouds of white mist. Lightning split the ink-black sky, illuminating the silhouette of the Gu family mansion, a French-style villa that looked like a stripped skeleton standing bare in the storm. Vera parked outside the gates. The moment she opened the car door, the rain lashed at her like whips. She didn't bother with an umbrella, didn't even raise a hand to shield her face. Her white lab coat, still on from the lab, was already soaked through, clinging to her skin like a second, freezing layer. She kept her head down and hurried toward the front door, her cheap coat trailing water behind her in a broken line of dark stains. She had just finished 48 straight hours of near-sleepless lab work. 5 days earlier, the Phase 3 clinical data for Shenong 1 had shown anomalous fluctuations. The entire team had been working in rotating shifts to troubleshoot, and as the project lead, she'd stayed at the front line the whole time. At 3 in the morning, when the last data point finally stabilized, she'd collapsed onto the lab bench for barely 3 hours of sleep, until her phone jolted her awake. Her mother Lillian had called 20 times in a row. Each call rang through to voicemail before the next one immediately replaced it. The final voice message was only 6 words, shrill and urgent: "Your father's dying, come home now." Vera stared at those 6 words for 3 full seconds, her heart seizing in her chest. She didn't stop to change. She grabbed her keys and ran. From the biotech park in the eastern district to the Gu mansion in the west, she'd driven clear across Seaport City. The wipers on her old sedan were practically flying off the windshield, but visibility was still near zero. She floored the accelerator, her mind fixed on a single thought: her father was dying. But now, as she pushed open the carved wooden doors of the mansion's living room, dripping wet and out of breath, the scene before her had nothing to do with the word "dying." The living room blazed with light. The crystal chandelier threw every corner into sharp relief. On the rosewood sofa, Lillian sat with rosy cheeks, holding the hand of a young woman and laughing so hard her face was creased with undisguised delight. The young woman wore a designer dress, a canary yellow confection of perfect tailoring, its neckline studded with tiny diamonds that caught the chandelier's light and scattered it like expensive confetti. That was Vera's younger sister, Yvette, 3 years younger, and the family's undisputed favorite. On the main single-seat sofa, Gordon Gu was taking his time with a cup of Da Hong Pao tea, the fragrance of oolong mingling with the costly agarwood incense burning somewhere in the room. On another sofa sat a man in a sharp suit, Morgan Shun, Vera's husband. Or rather, her soon-to-be ex-husband. He wore a charcoal gray Armani suit, with sapphire cufflinks glinting at his wrists. On his knee rested a neatly bound document, not too thick, not too thin, clearly prepared with care. His posture was perfect, legs crossed, fingers resting lightly on the document's cover, looking for all the world like a man attending a routine business meeting. But when his eyes swept toward the doorway, toward the drenched and bedraggled figure standing there, a flicker of disgust passed through them, so quick you'd miss it if you blinked, and it cut through Vera like a blade. The room fell silent for 2 seconds. Yvette was the first to laugh, covering her mouth with a hand whose nails were painted a delicate nude pink. "Oh my God, sis, what happened to you? Did you fall into a river or something?" Vera ignored her. Her eyes were fixed on Lillian. Her voice came out hoarse from sleep deprivation, with a barely perceptible tremor beneath it. "Mom, you said Dad was dying." Lillian's smile collapsed. She waved a hand, as if shooing away a fly. "Oh, come on. If I hadn't said that, would you have even come back? You're always locked up in that dump of a lab, playing with those worthless test tubes, and you can't be bothered with anything important happening in this family. You're completely useless." Vera stood there, rainwater streaming from her hair, her chin, her fingertips, pooling at her feet on the mirror-polished marble. She looked down at the dark stain spreading beneath her. It was the only thing in the room that didn't belong, a smear of dirt and rain on a floor too perfect for her. "Family?" she repeated softly, tasting the word like something gone stale. "Sis, don't get all dramatic." Yvette rose and walked to the coffee table with a dancer's lightness, picking up the document and flipping through it with a studied nonchalance. "We called you back because there's something wonderful to tell you. Morgan has some papers for you to sign. Once you do, you'll be free." "Free?" Vera's gaze finally shifted to Morgan. The man who'd held her in the dark and whispered, "Vera, I'll never marry anyone else." The man who'd knelt before her 3 years ago, gripping her hand, his eyes red-rimmed, and said, "The company is finished. Only you can save me." Now he sat on her father's couch, clutching divorce papers, and the way he looked at her was the way you'd look at a stranger. "Vera," Morgan said, his voice still that same deep, pleasant register she'd once found so reassuring. "Now that you're here, let's get this signed." He pushed the document across the table. The title was stark black, Divorce Agreement. Below it, in smaller type, and Patent Rights Transfer Waiver. Vera's eyes snagged on that small line. Her pupils contracted. The blood in her veins seemed to freeze, a cold so deep it crept from her fingertips all the way to her heart. "Morgan," she said, her voice barely audible above the rain hammering against the windows, "what is this?" "Oh, it's simple." Yvette cut in, sliding her arm through Morgan's, chin lifted like a preening peacock. "Morgan and I are getting married. And sis, look at yourself. You spend all your time in that lab, reeking of formaldehyde and reagents. Your skin looks like sandpaper, your hair's a mess, and you never buy decent clothes. You're an embarrassment to the Shin group. Morgan needs a wife who can actually hold her own in high society. Not some. Enough." Vera's voice was still soft, but the room went quiet. She kept her eyes locked on Morgan. "I spent 3 years on Shinong 1. 3 years without sleep, running over 10,000 experiments, using every last bit of my grandfather's research. And you want me to just hand it over to Yvette?" Morgan's gaze flickered away for an instant, then returned, his tone smooth and self-assured. "Vera, you need to understand, the Shin Group's success is built on my business strategy, not a few pieces of paper. Besides, Yvette is the company's brand ambassador. Putting the patent under her name looks better for investors. And for the divorce. I'll give you a 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts and $500,000. You should be grateful. That's more than enough to live on for the rest of your life." Vera was silent for a moment. Then she smiled, a slight curve of her lips, so faint you might miss it. But there was no warmth in it. The smile of shattered glass, all sharp edges. Grateful, she repeated, and when her eyes rose to meet his, they were cold. 3 years ago, when the Shin Group was on the brink of bankruptcy, who begged me for my grandfather's medical texts? Who knelt and promised, Vera, you're the only one who can save me. If we can develop this drug, I'll be good to you for the rest of my life. Her voice never rose, but each word was ground out between her teeth. Now you're going public, and you're taking everything I built, giving it to my own sister. Crack. Gordon slammed his palm on the coffee table, hard enough to rattle the teacups and splash tea across the surface. He glared at Vera, his graying brows drawn together in fury. Watch your mouth. You call that taking? Morgan and Yvette are in love. Look at yourself, do you even look like a Gu family daughter? Vera, I'll tell you straight, your mother and I are the ones who decided you should divorce him. Vera's gaze moved from Morgan to her father. The man she'd worked so hard to impress her whole life. The man whose approval she'd sought with every scholarship, every published paper, every new patent she'd called to tell him about first. Dad, she said, her voice cracking, what are you saying? I'm your daughter. Daughter? Lillian cut in, her voice like nails on glass. If you really cared about your father and me, you'd hand over that patent to your sister. Your brother Kevin made some bad investments overseas, he owes hundreds of millions. The people he owes money to said if they don't get paid by next month, they'll cut off his hand. She slapped the armrest for emphasis. Morgan promised, if Yvette marries him with the patent, he'll cover Kevin's debts. Vera, that's your little brother's life. Are you going to let him die just to keep a piece of paper? The room went still. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating every face in the room. Vera looked at her mother. The woman who'd held her in the delivery room and said, finally, a girl. The woman who told her, the day she got into Seaport University's biology program, what's the point of a woman reading so much? The woman who'd taken her dying grandfather's 50,000 yuan surgery fund and spent it on a sports car for Kevin. And suddenly, Vera understood everything. This wasn't some random betrayal. It was a carefully orchestrated ambush, her parents, her sister, her husband, all in on it together. In their eyes, she was never a person who deserved love or respect. She was a resource, a blood bag to be drained whenever her brother's bottomless greed needed filling. Kevin's gambling debts, 200 million, were the real lead actor in tonight's play. Sis. Yvette's voice was sweet and cruel, like a cat playing with a cornered mouse. Don't pretend you're some kind of martyr. Your grandfather's old recipes aren't that special. Our R&D director already replicated your core data and extraction process. This transfer waiver is just a formality, so my name will be on the patent office website. Sign it, or don't, either way, the Shin Group has ways to make you disappear from the biotech industry entirely. Understand? She reached into her Gucci bag and pulled out a stack of printed documents, tossing them onto the coffee table in front of Vera. They scattered open, spilling chemical formulas and data tables, 3 years of her life, reduced to paper. Morgan stood and straightened his jacket, resuming his cold, decisive businessman's demeanor. Vera, don't make a scene. Leave this house today, and you'll never be allowed back in. Your lab will be shut down tomorrow. All your staff will be reassigned. You're fired. The living room fell into dead silence. Outside, the rain kept pounding against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a hammering, muffled roar, like fists beating against glass from the other side. It filled every corner of the room, but it couldn't fill the void opening inside Vera's chest. She stood there, her eyes passing slowly over the 4 faces before her. Her father, flushed and sweating, his gray hair damp at the temples, not a shred of guilt in his eyes. Her mother, lips pressed tight, arms crossed, chin lifted in defiance. Her sister, perfectly made up and sweetly smiling, still clinging to her husband's arm. Her husband, impeccable in his suit, looking at her like she was already a stranger. 4 people around a rosewood table, unfolding her 20 years of life like a piece of scrap paper and telling her, "You're worthless." Vera closed her eyes. She heard her own heartbeat, slow, heavy, like a bell tolling in her chest. And she remembered her grandmother, years ago, sitting with her in the courtyard of the old Hundred Herbs pharmacy, the sun warm on their faces. Her grandmother had said, "Vera, people's hearts are sometimes more bitter than medicine. But remember, medicine can cure the body. The heart is harder to heal." She hadn't understood then. She understood now. When she opened her eyes again, all the softness was gone, the vulnerability of a daughter, the tenderness of a wife, burned away. In its place was something forged in absolute cold, iron quenched in ice water, harder than anything that had come before. "Fine. I'll sign." Her voice was perfectly flat. Yvette's face lit up with barely contained triumph. Morgan exhaled in relief. Lillian's mouth curved back into a smile, and Gordon sank into his chair and took a swig of his half-cold tea. Vera stepped forward. Her lab coat was still dripping, leaving a trail of footprints across the marble. She leaned down, picked up the Mont Blanc pen on the coffee table, and felt its cold metal press against her fingers. She flipped through the thick divorce agreement, page by page, until she reached each signature line. Then she signed, carefully, neatly, the way she recorded data in her lab notebooks. Methodical. Unhurried. As she signed the last page, lightning split the sky outside, bleaching her face to bone white. She set the pen down. Morgan, Gordon, Lillian, Yvette. She straightened up slowly, her eyes touching each of them in turn. Her voice was even, but each word landed like a precise blow. "From this moment on, I'm no longer part of this family. And whatever you've taken from me today." Her lips curved into a faint, cold smile that made every spine in the room prickle with unease. "I promise you'll be on your knees giving it all back. And your reckoning will come harder than this storm." She ripped off her wet lab coat and flung it into Yvette's perfectly styled hair. It landed with a damp slap, tangling in her sister's carefully arranged curls. Yvette shrieked and stumbled backward. Vera didn't look back. She walked out into the storm. Behind her, Lillian's shrill voice cut through the rain, "Ungrateful brat. Let's see how far you get." But the words were swallowed by the wind as Vera pushed open the door. Rain hit her like a wall. Through her thin cotton shirt, the water was ice cold, but she didn't slow down. She walked across the courtyard to her old sedan, yanked the door open, and sat in the driver's seat for a few seconds, soaked through and shivering. Then she picked up her phone. Her contact list held a number she hadn't dialed in 3 years. She stared at the name for a long moment, Matthew Lynn, and then pressed call. It rang twice. "Matthew. It's Vera." Her voice echoed in the small car, carrying a certainty she barely recognized in herself. "Activate the Qingnong Overseas Trust. Plan 1. She tapped the steering wheel. "And file an emergency motion with Seaport City's First People's Court. Patent priority and trade secret infringement protection. I need the receipt by 9 tomorrow morning." A pause on the other end. Then a measured response, "Understood, Ms. Gu." Vera tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and leaned back, letting her head rest against the headrest. Rainwater dripped from her hair, sliding down her cheeks, warm and salty. She couldn't tell if it was rain or something else. She looked up at the sky, torn open by lightning. The clouds churned above her, as if the whole night was waiting for something. She didn't cry. This revenge would draw no blood. Law and capital would be her scalpels. She would peel back every layer of their lies until nothing was left. The engine turned over. Headlights cut through the rain. She drove into the dark. 2 weeks later, Seaport City had sweltered into the hottest day of the summer. The Hilton's grand ballroom blazed with light and sound, the chandeliers refracting off the jewelry and silk of the city's elite. Nearly half of Seaport's business community had turned out: investment partners, biotech executives, senior editors from the financial press. Anyone with ties to the Shin Group had received an invitation. This was more than a product launch. It was a carefully engineered, capital celebration. A massive LED screen dominated the stage, looping a slick promotional video for the Shin Group's newest biotech drug, Shinnom 1. A white-coated researcher moved through a pristine lab, handling gleaming instruments, as triumphant orchestral music swelled. The narrator's voice was deep and confident. A decade in the making, the Shin Group, in partnership with Seaport University's top research team, has conquered the side effect challenges of traditional lipid-lowering drugs. The footage shifted to rows of glass culture dishes, then dissolved into the title card, Shinnom 1, in glittering gold characters. In the front row, Gordon and Lillian sat at the VIP table, surrounded by well-wishers. Gordon wore a new dark gray tunic, his hair slicked back, his face flushed with drink and satisfaction. Lillian had changed into a burgundy silk dress, and around her neck hung the imperial green jade pendant Yvette had given her 2 days earlier, the same deep green glow that had once hung around the neck of the woman Vera had outmaneuvered. Lillian's smile seemed to radiate light. She repeated to anyone who'd listen, "Our Yvette was always the clever one, way smarter than her sister." But all eyes were on the stage. Morgan stood under the spotlights, resplendent in a custom navy suit, a sapphire pin glinting at his lapel. In his hands, a velvet box held a ruby ring so large it seemed to pulse with its own red fire. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, distinguished investors," Morgan said, his voice magnified through the ballroom speakers, "today is not just the day we announce the Shin Group's acquisition of the Shinnom 1 patent, it's the day I ask the love of my life, Yvette Gu, to marry me." Applause thundered from the crowd. Yvette emerged from the wings in a flowing white gown, its train glittering with thousands of tiny sequins, moving like a fish's tail as she walked. Her hair was swept into an elegant chignon, with tiny pearl clips at her temples. Her makeup was flawless, subtle, sophisticated, the artful look of effortless elegance. And she was weeping. Rinsing tears from her eyes with a lace handkerchief, tears that caught the cameras and flashed like rain on glass. She moved toward Morgan, radiant and broken-hearted with joy. Morgan dropped to one knee and held up the ring. "Yvette, marry me." The room exploded. Camera shutters fired like machine guns. The applause was deafening. At the VIP table, Lillian clasped her hands to her mouth, real tears streaming this time, and reached over to grab Gordon's arm, squeezing hard. "Gordon. Did you see that? Our daughter." Gordon was beaming. Beside him sat Kevin, looking out of place in a gaudy floral shirt, his collar open, a cigar burning between his fingers. He kept glancing at his phone, tapping the table with nervous agitation, but there was relief in his eyes too, the relief of a man who'd just been pulled back from the edge. Morgan had leaned down to whisper to him earlier, as soon as the signing was done, the first $200 million from the U.S. venture fund would hit his account, clearing all his Macau debts. For the first time in months, Kevin felt real hope. Around the table, guests kept approaching to toast. "Mr. Gu, what a remarkable daughter you have. Yvette is not only beautiful, she's a top graduate of Seaport University's biology department. To have developed such a breakthrough technology at her age, the sky's the limit." Exactly. With this patent, the Shin Group's star market listing is a sure thing. Market cap is projected to exceed $10 billion. The Gu family is on the rise. "Mrs. Gu, that jade is exquisite. A gift from your daughter, I assume. So filial." Lillian was practically floating on the compliments, her spine straightening, her voice rising a notch. "Of course. My Yvette has always had a gift for these things. Not like some people who just bury their heads in books. For a woman, talent isn't enough, you need luck, and the good sense to take care of your family." The way she said, "some people," dripped with contempt, as if brushing dust from her sleeve. On stage, the proposal had reached its climax. Yvette extended her hand, trembling, as Morgan slid the ruby onto her finger. The applause swelled. Someone shouted, "Forever." Someone else yelled, "Morgan, you legend." The financial reporters were already planning tomorrow's front page. And then the ballroom's massive carved doors slammed open. Not pushed. Slammed, like something heavy had been waiting outside, gathering momentum. The doors hit the side walls with a bang that cut through the noise like a gunshot. Men and women in black suits filed in, badges gleaming on their chests, the seal of the Seaport City Intermediate People's Court. Behind them came several lawyers in formal dress. The man at the front was in his early 40s, lean, with eyes like a hawk's. Matthew Lynn, the legend of Seaport's legal world, undefeated in court. The ballroom went silent. Every camera swung around, every eye turned toward the intruders. Matthew strode toward the stage, his heels sharp on the marble. He moved through the stunned guests, past the confused investors, past the journalists who hadn't yet processed what they were seeing, until he reached the edge of the stage. From his briefcase he pulled a document with a red official seal and hundreds of pages. He glanced at Morgan, then spoke into the nearest microphone, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Mr. Morgan Shun, Ms. Yvette Gu. My apologies for interrupting your celebration. I am Matthew Lin, lead counsel for the Qingnang Biotech Trust and Ms. Vera Gu. We filed suit yesterday with the Seaport City Intermediate People's Court. The defendants are the Shun Group, Mr. Morgan Shun, and Ms. Yvette Gu." The room might as well have been frozen. Morgan's face stiffened, but he recovered quickly. He released Yvette's hand and stepped forward, his smile still professional. "Mr. Lin, this is a major company announcement and my engagement. If this is about property division with my ex-wife, the divorce agreement is clear," she signed away her claims. "Mr. Shun." Matthew cut him off, voice calm but crisp. "I'm not here about your divorce. I'm here about something far more serious, trade secret infringement and patent priority disputes." He gestured, and his assistants began handing out thick stacks of photocopies to the reporters and investors. Under China's patent law and anti-unfair competition law, Ms. Vera Gu, during her marriage to Mr. Shun, independently developed Shinong 1's core compound using her grandfather's unreleased 100 herbs formulas. All experimental records, raw data, and funding were independently supported by the Qingnang Trust, with no connection to the Shun Group. In other words, Matthew paused, scanning the shocked faces before him. Shinong 1 was never Shun Group's property. Uproar. What? Wasn't it Yvette's research? What's going on here? Morgan's composure finally cracked. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near growl. "Matthew, Vera signed a transfer agreement. She gave up ownership." "You mean this?" Matthew pulled a copy from his bag and held it up. Under Article 151 of the Civil Code, any transaction where one party exploits another's vulnerable position or lack of judgment to create a grossly unfair agreement can be voided by the disadvantaged party. Your agreement was signed under duress, she was exhausted, isolated, and you used her brother's life as leverage. His voice rose. More importantly, Yvette Gu's patent application shows clear evidence of academic fraud and falsified lab logs. We've submitted a formal request to the National Intellectual Property Administration to invalidate the patent entirely. The court has already issued an emergency freeze. He turned to face Morgan, whose face had gone the color of ash. All Shun Group assets related to Shinong 1, research data, inventory, and bank accounts, are hereby frozen until this case is resolved. The ballroom erupted. Asset freeze. Then what about the IPO? Patent theft. Academic fraud. In biotech. Pull our investment. Shun Group stock is worthless. The crowd around Gordon and Lillian melted away like tidewater retreating from shore. The smiles, the flattery, the warmth, all gone in an instant, replaced by cold distance. "No, this can't be," Lillian shrieked, her voice cracking. "That pauper Vera can't afford Matthew Lynn. This is a mistake. Morgan. Morgan, say something." Yvette clung to his arm, her nails biting into his sleeve. Her makeup had started to run. The mask of effortless elegance was gone. Morgan stood on the stage, trembling. He watched the investors leave. He watched the cameras flash. He saw his empire, which had seemed so solid, crumbling into dust. Asset freeze. No Shannon 1. No IPO. Billions in pre-launch marketing and production costs, all for nothing. Debt collection notices would drown him. He glanced down at the sapphire pin on his lapel. Vera. His fingers dug into his palms. He'd thought he was discarding a stepping stone. He'd never imagined he was unleashing a goddess of vengeance. The Hilton disaster was only the beginning. Within 3 days, the Shin Group scandal had blazed across Seaport's financial headlines. Shin Group patent allegedly stolen, ex-wife sues, IPO in jeopardy, Yvette Gu accused of academic fraud. Executives resigned. Partners cancelled contracts. Demand letters flooded Morgan's office. He locked himself in his top-floor office for 2 days, barely moving. Outside the windows, Seaport streets were bright and busy, but inside his office, the air was thick as a coffin. The Gu household was even worse. Gordon sat slumped in his armchair, hair wild, tunic wrinkled, collar open to reveal a stained undershirt. In just days, he'd aged a decade, heavy bags under his eyes, cracked lips, a cigarette burning to ash on his trouser leg. "Dad. Mom. We need to do something." Kevin was on his knees, clutching Lillian's leg, tears and snot smearing his face. "If the money doesn't clear by midnight tomorrow, they'll send the video to the police. They'll cut off my hand. I'll go to prison." 200 million, where are we supposed to find 200 million? Lillian wailed, slapping her own thigh, her carefully pinned hair coming undone. She turned to Yvette, huddled on the sofa. "Yvette. What about Morgan? He's a billionaire. Get him to advance the money, for your brother." Yvette laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Mom, don't be naive. Morgan's accounts are frozen. He can't even pay this month's salaries. He broke into Vera's lab last night to steal the original cultures, and got locked inside by a security system Vera designed. Matthew Lynn had to bail him out. If it weren't for that, he'd be in holding right now." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That system. Vera installed it herself. She knew someone would try. Then what do we do? Just let Kevin die?" Gordon slammed the table, the ashtray leaping into the air. His eyes were bloodshot, veins bulging at his temples. "We'll go to Vera. She's got money, Matthew Lynn works for her. That Qingnang Trust was set up by her grandfather, that old miser. Let's go. I don't care what it takes. She's still my blood, I'll make her listen." 2 hours later, they arrived at the Qingnang Biotech Tower. 36 floors up, the executive office overlooked the river, its glass walls flooding the room with afternoon sun. Simple, elegant, a white marble desk, a laptop, a cup of black coffee, and a potted plant. Vera sat behind the desk in a sharp black suit, her hair pinned up, exposing the clean lines of her neck and jaw. She looked out at the sunlit skyline as if nothing outside concerned her. The door burst open. "Ms. Gu, the secretary began. Vera lifted a hand. The secretary retreated. Gordon, Lillian, Yvette, and Kevin swept in like a storm. Lillian started screaming before she was through the door. "Vera! You ungrateful wretch. You're sitting here drinking coffee while your family falls apart. Your brother's life is on the line. Have you no shame? Vera set down her coffee. The surface stilled. She looked at them, calmly, distantly. No fear. No anger. Just the cool detachment of someone observing insects from a great height. Mr. Gu, Ms. Liu. Her voice was polite, and utterly cold. I severed ties with the Gu family 2 weeks ago. You signed the agreement. The notary has it on file. You may address me as Ms. Gu or Vera. Daughter is no longer applicable. You. Gordon's face purpled. You think you're so high and mighty with your trust fund. I'm telling you, the 100 Herbs estate was my inheritance. You've illegally transferred assets overseas. I'll sue you. Go ahead. Vera didn't even blink. She picked up her phone and turned the screen toward him. I have grandfather's notarized will here. It states that all assets, Gordon, since you had no interest in traditional medicine and transferred assets during your marriage, passed to me upon my 26th birthday and the successful development of a new drug. That happened 2 weeks ago. Shenong, one meets the condition. Would you like a copy to show your lawyer? Gordon gaped, his face cycling from red to white. Sis. Yvette's voice cracked, and she dropped to her knees in front of the desk. Please. I'm begging you. I'll give Morgan back. I don't want the shares, I don't want the marriage. Just call off the lawsuit. If you do, Shen Group can still go public. Kevin will be saved. We're sisters, you can't be this heartless. She looked up, tears tracking through her ruined mascara, pitiful and broken. Vera looked down at her sister. What was in those eyes? Fear? Regret? Calculation? She studied Yvette's face for a long moment. Then she smiled. Yvette. When you sat in that living room and told me to be grateful, did you think about sisterhood? When you wore that couture gown on the Hilton stage, enjoying the attention that was rightfully mine, did you think about me then? She leaned down, took Yvette's chin between her fingers, and made her look up. You're not asking me to save your brother. You're asking me to save your fantasy, your designer life, your billionaire's wife dreams. Those are worth more to you than a sister ever was. She released Yvette's chin and straightened. As for Kevin, her eyes shifted to the cowering figure behind them. His debts are his own. Since the Gu family loves him so much, you can use your own resources to fill his hole. Leave me out of it. You bitch. Kevin lunged for the marble penholder on the desk, swinging it at Vera's head. Before it connected, a hidden panel slid open. 2 massive security guards rushed in, pinning Kevin's arms behind his back and slamming his face onto the cold marble. Ms. Gu, shall I call the police? One asked. Vera took a tissue from the box, wiped her fingers slowly, and dropped it in the bin. No. That's too easy for them. Show them out. Vera. You'll burn in hell. Lillian shrieked as they dragged her toward the door. The office fell silent. Vera stood alone at the window, her shadow long and thin in the afternoon light. She picked up her desk phone. Matthew. Update. His voice came through measured and ready. He's making his move. Morgan approached Tianqing Capital, a shadow financier. He's trying to borrow 400 million against his personal shares to clear the debt and relist. He thinks it's his only way out. Tianqing Capital. Vera's lips curved. He doesn't know who really owns it, Matthew said, his voice barely holding back laughter. Qingnang owns the majority holding. He's desperate, he didn't even do basic due diligence. Vera, he's already stepped into the trap. Good. Vera turned to face the river, its freighters tracing patient arcs through the sunlit water. Give him a little more rope. She hung up. 3 years ago, when Morgan had knelt and begged, she'd said yes. Not because she believed his promises, but because she still thought kindness could change people. Now she understood, some people were vessels of greed. No amount of kindness could fill them. The only way to stop them was to shatter the vessel itself. 1 week later, the Seaport City Commercial Arbitration Court had merged with the Intermediate People's Court, creating a single hearing room large enough for 200 spectators. The gallery was packed, Seaport's top financial journalists, biotech heavyweights, investors, and ordinary citizens. Outside, people had been queuing since midnight. The story had dominated headlines for a week: a brilliant female scientist betrayed by her husband and sister, a 100 billion yuan patent, allegations of academic fraud, and the Shen Group's sudden rise and catastrophic fall. Every element struck a nerve. In the front row, the Gu family sat together. Kevin wore a smirk of vengeful anticipation. The night before, Morgan had sent word that his 400 million from Tianjin Capital had come through. They could clear Kevin's debts, buy off Shen Group suppliers, and refile the patent. Just wait, Kevin muttered to Yvette. Today Vera's finished. Yvette gripped her hands so hard her nails dug into her palms. Vera sat at the defense table in a crisp white suit. She held only a glass of water and a thin folder of documents. Beside her, Morgan's lawyers had stacked evidence in towering piles. But Vera's back was straight. Her breathing was steady. She looked like a marble statue that had never been warm. Plaintiff may present new evidence, the judge announced. Morgan's lawyer, Derek Zhang, known as the Invincible Shark, rose with theatrical bravado in his too bright crimson robe. He held up a thick contract. Your Honor, we have definitive proof of Shenong 1's true ownership. Testing shows its core compounds match the 100 Herbs formulas at less than 30%. This is independent development. He paused for effect. The gallery buzzed. In addition, Derek continued, jabbing a finger at Vera, Ms. Gu is accused of embezzling 12 million yuan from Shen Group research funds into her trust. We demand full patent rights for Shen Group, and criminal charges for embezzlement. Embezzlement? 12 million. She could go to prison. Looks like Shen Group found its smoking gun. Kevin slapped his thigh in triumph. Yvette's tight expression relaxed. Morgan straightened his tie and threw Vera a look of cold triumph. Vera. You were always too young to play in this league. Defendant's response, the judge said. Matthew Lin rose slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't open his folder. He just stood there, head slightly bowed, like he was savoring the moment. Then he smiled, not nervously, but with the confidence of someone who just watched his opponent deal themselves a losing hand. Your Honor. His voice was calm, but it cut through the room. The plaintiff's evidence, both the test report and the embezzlement claim, are, to use the technical term. He paused, letting Derek's expression curdle. A perfect act of self-digging. They've dug their own graves. He turned to the projector. The screen blazed to life with a document, top, 3 golden national emblems, below, the words, Top Secret, in red, stamps from the National Security Bureau, the State Secrets Bureau, and the National Intellectual Property Administration. Derek went white. The gallery exploded. Top secret. National security. What's this about? Morgan's stomach dropped. Matthew's voice was steady and precise. Mr. Shen, did you really think your mediocre R&D team could replicate Vera Gu's core data? Ms. Gu is the chief scientist of the 100 Herbs Gene Bank, a national key research initiative. Shenong 1's core compound was designated a Category 2 state secret 6 months ago and fully protected by the State Secrets Bureau. He looked Morgan in the eye. What your R&D director stole was bait data, designed specifically to test your internal security, planted to see if you'd bite. Which you did. That less than 30% match report you're so proud of. It was built from that bait. In other words, the Shin Group spent billions preparing to manufacture a dead-end drug that will never pass inspection. He closed the folder. And because Mr. Shin attempted to transfer and sell that bait data, and to launder it through offshore shell companies, he has now triggered criminal liability under the Criminal Code's provisions on illegal transfer of state-prohibited export technology and fraudulent litigation. Morgan's mind went blank. His ears were ringing. He saw Derek slump in his seat, unable to speak, saw the gallery erupting, heard Yvette screaming something he couldn't parse, all of it distant and muffled, like sound through water. "No, this isn't real," he heard himself say, grabbing Derek's arm. "Say something. Fight back." But Derek just stared, his voice a broken whisper, "It's over, it's over." After 2 decades in the profession, Derek knew the weight of those 3 words, top secret. This wasn't a business dispute. This was a war with the state itself. Regarding the 12 million research funds, Matthew continued, those were Ms. Gu's legally mandated national research stipend and licensing fees, audited by the National Audit Office. If anyone's guilty of embezzlement. He turned to the Gu family. According to recent bank records, Mr. Morgan Shin transferred 250 million yuan, out of the 400 million he borrowed, to Kevin Gu's Macau gambling accounts and Gordon Gu's offshore accounts. Through underground banks. Yesterday afternoon. The other Shin Group shareholders erupted. 250 million. You used the company's rescue money to pay your brother-in-law's gambling debts. Morgan, you're insane. The company's collapsing and you're liquidating assets. Judge. We demand Morgan's removal, we're filing charges. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Given the severity of this case, involving major financial crimes and threats to national security, this court finds, plaintiff's claims are dismissed. Vera Gu retains full patent rights. The court will now transfer criminal evidence on Morgan Shin, Kevin Gu, and Gordon Gu for prosecution. The gavel fell. Morgan collapsed in his chair, a broken shell. Lillian collapsed in the gallery. Yvette screamed and threw herself toward her mother. Vera rose slowly. She walked down the steps, across the floor, and stopped in front of Morgan. He looked up at her, fear in his eyes now, where there had once been contempt. She looked down at him, her face calm and remote. Morgan. I told you. What you took would have to be returned, on your knees. This 400 million won't save you. It's the noose around your neck. She turned and walked away. Outside the courthouse, before Morgan or the Gu family could breathe free air, police vehicles screeched to a halt at the steps. Officers in uniform descended with arrest warrants. Morgan Shin, Gordon Gu, Kevin Gu. You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraudulent litigation, and money laundering. Please come with us. No. It was Vera. Kevin screamed, struggling, but his father, who'd always protected him, just stood frozen, shaking. The cuffs clicked. Yvette lunged forward, but an officer blocked her. She stumbled on the stairs, her expensive heels scraping the stone. Morgan looked up at Vera, who stood higher on the steps, white against the sky. Vera. He croaked. You're ruthless. She looked down at him. Not ruthless, Morgan. I just gave you a stage. You performed the play yourself. She turned and walked down to Yvette, who cowered at her feet, makeup ruined, dress stained with dirt and tears. You wanted to be a billionaire's wife. Shin Group filed for bankruptcy this morning. Morgan's assets, houses, cars, everything, will be auctioned off. She paused. And you? As the fraudulent researcher on the patent, you're expelled from Seaport University. Blacklisted from the industry. Your elite life is over. No. No. Yvette crumpled. Lillian, now revived, hurled herself forward, shrieking. Vera! I'm your mother. How will we survive? Vera turned to face her. The woman who'd stolen a dying man's surgery fund. The woman who'd told Vera her grades meant nothing. The woman who'd walked out of her wedding. Mother. Vera's voice was soft. When grandfather was dying and needed $50,000 for surgery, and you bought Kevin a car with it, did you think about your motherly duty then? Lillian went white. How do you? I have the records. Want to see? The transfer from grandfather's medical account to the Porsche dealership, labeled Kevin's car. I've had it for 3 years. Lillian's voice died in her throat. The cameras flashed. The crowd muttered. She stole her own father's surgery fund. No wonder Vera cut them off. Karma. Vera pocketed her phone. She took one last look at the remnants of her family, father, brother, ex-husband being led to police cars, mother collapsed in the dirt. Morgan, Gordon, Kevin, 10 years minimum. Morgan, you'll be 47 before you see the outside again. By then, everyone who once knew your name will have forgotten it. She turned and walked to her car. Matthew opened the door. She slid into the black leather seat, and all the noise, Lillian's wailing, the police sirens, the reporters' questions, was sealed outside. The car pulled into traffic. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Seaport City unfolded around her, skyscrapers, the winding river, a white ferry tracing a lazy arc through the golden water. Matthew turned from the passenger seat. Vera, what's next? She didn't hesitate. Back to the lab. Shenong, one still needs final validation. Matthew laughed. The woman who'd just destroyed a billion-dollar empire, who'd sent her own father to prison, was thinking about data validation. He nodded and said nothing more. The rain had stopped. 3 years later. The Qingnang International Biomedical Research Center had risen on Seaport's high-tech campus, a sprawling complex of 7 interconnected towers, the tallest emblazoned with the name, Qingnang, in soft metallic lettering. The campus was green, with an artificial lake reflecting the white buildings and white egrets waiting at the water's edge. Today was Qingnang's dual listing on the NYSE and the Star Market. The ceremony had drawn the world's top biotech figures, Wall Street fund partners, 3 Nobel laureates, senior health officials, and university research heads. Luxury cars crowded the parking lot. In the circular hall, 20-meter-high ceilings, glass walls flooding the space with afternoon light, the giant curved screen played Qingnang's journey from that cramped, underfunded lab 3 years ago to this gleaming edifice of international prestige. The host stepped on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Qingnang Biotech's founder, chairman, and chief scientist, Ms. Vera Gu. Thunderous applause. Vera stepped out in a white qipao, its hem and sleeves embroidered with delicate silver medicinal herbs, the essential ingredients from her grandfather's 100 herbs formulas. Her hair was pinned with a simple white jade clasp. 2 small pearl earrings glinted at her ears. She moved to center stage, into the warm spotlight. Behind her, the screen displayed the Qingnang logo, a stylized leaf, clean and powerful. Thank you all, she said, her voice clear and calm. 3 years ago, Qingnang was a shuttered lab with a second-hand hood and a team of 10. Our most valuable asset was a box of my grandfather's handwritten medical texts. The room was silent, transfixed. Today we stand here, backed by global capital, with the core Chinese herbal gene targeting technology we developed independently. We've conquered one of the world's 3 major rare diseases, interstitial lung disease. We've secured global patents. And we've fulfilled my grandfather's dream, to bring traditional Chinese medicine to the world, for all humanity. The applause swelled again. A white-haired health official in the front row wiped his eyes. One more thing, Vera said when the clapping subsided. The first dividend from Qingnang's public listing, 5 billion yuan, was placed this morning into the China Rare Disease Medical Assistance Fund. It will cover medical costs for underprivileged children. Wealth comes from society, and must return to it. That's Qingnang's founding principle. And my personal bottom line. A beat of silence. Then an explosion of applause, louder than before, cameras flashing, several journalists in tears. While Vera stood on that sunlit stage, 3 floors beneath, in a different corner of the world, a different screen was playing. In a damp, cramped housing unit on Seaport's outskirts, Lillian sat on a broken sofa, her body sunken into the collapsed cushions. 3 years had stripped her of everything. The mansion had been seized. She now survived on discarded vegetables from the market and washing dishes at local diners. Her hair was white, her face deeply lined, her hands calloused and raw. Beside her, Yvette huddled in another sunken corner, knees under a frayed blanket, in a cheap t-shirt, hair dull and split, purple circles under her eyes. She worked at a dive bar, enduring drunken customers' groping hands. Her arrogance was long gone, ground out by exhaustion. But their eyes were locked on the screen. Vera stood in the spotlight, serene and powerful. The audio carried her voice: wealth comes from society, and must return to it. 5 billion. Lillian grabbed the TV frame, her nails scraping plastic. Her throat worked, and then she broke into hysterical sobs. Vera, my daughter, she's worth billions now. What was I thinking? Why did I waste my love on Kevin? If I'd been good to her, even a little, I'd be the queen of Seaport now. What have I done? Yvette didn't cry. She just stared at Vera's elegant, untouchable face, her flawless skin, her clean, unscarred hands, and looked down at her own ruined, calloused fingers. The cruelest punishment wasn't death. It was living in the mud, watching the person you'd thrown away rise higher than you could ever dream. In Seaport First Prison, inside a bleak common room, 3 men watched the same broadcast. Morgan wore faded prison blues, gaunt and hollow-cheeked, his hair gray and thin. Gordon sat beside him, white-haired, stooped, a half-eaten cornbread in his hands. Kevin was farther away, face scarred, shoulders curled inward. Qingnang's first dividend, 5 billion yuan. The news anchor said. Morgan's body jerked. 5 billion. 12 times the 400 million he'd risked everything for. And she gave it away. He stared at his own hands, blue-veined and shaking. He laughed, a thin, dry sound, like air from a collapsing lung. Dad, 17 more years. Kevin's voice broke. I can't take it. Gordon didn't answer. He stared at the screen, at Vera, golden and untouchable, and something cracked in his chest. He thought of her as a child. 2 braids, a perfect test paper in her hands, her eyes bright with stars. Dad, look. And he'd waved her away, distracted by Kevin's problems. Put it on the table. That was the last time he'd seen her smile like that. The cornbread crumbled in his fist. He opened his mouth, but what came out was a broken, gurgling cry. And then blood, dark red, spattering the floor. Dad! Dad! Kevin screamed. The guards rushed in. Outside the prison walls, the bells of the Qingnang Center rang out across the campus, clear, resonant, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Vera walked down the steps of the main hall, into the July sunlight. The wind from the lake carried lotus fragrance. She lifted her face to the sky, and the sun warmed her eyelids. Grandfather. Mom. She let out a long, slow breath. She turned and looked down the long path ahead, where the afternoon light stretched toward a limitless future. More experiments, more patience, more unknowns to discover. This was what she'd always wanted, to use her gift to heal the kind of people her mother had once been. Behind her, she heard Matthew and Luke coming down the steps, side by side. Their footsteps fell into rhythm with hers. The wind swept the last dust and shadows away. Vera didn't look back. The sun was bright. The road was open.